It's Monday, so despite shadows above or weariness within my soul, the line goes up. Like rain contained in clouds, my work must be done. Washwoman, under searing hot sun and seething pain from yesterday's whose promise only echoes tomorrow's of the same, my labor calls me. I am the washwoman, left to clean and clear away the stains that others make. Though my back fears to break, this is my charge. I choose to escape through each stroke on my board, knowing they take me to freedom. My labor is not in vain. Billowing in the breeze, each affirms their worth of me. But I know this is not my purpose. To find beauty amidst even this requires strength and power, sufficient to carry me past this hour. See me on each line, taste my freedom on breeze-filled winds that ready me for tomorrows beyond those that say ironing will complete this day's work. Each day, I begin anew the task that is mine alone to make clean the soiled and sordid things of this world, as my true beauty goes unseen.
License and registration, he can sense your aggravation.
On the head of the fallen angel.
When the world is muttering under the floorboards, stomp even louder.
Time.
Let them know you are alive today.
Or unhum.
Did you know that your hands came with a ripple effect?
Whisper tones unraveling like silk.
Blood, sweat, and tears win by any means poetry.
Sway, look at me. Is a piece of the pie too good for me?
Some may call it rock the mic. We call it poetry.
Hello, welcome to Sojourn with Words. I'm your host, Sistah Joy, and we are excited today because we have not just a poet, and of course, to me to say not just a poet, you know the artist must be extraordinary, but I'm speaking of our guest artist today is Ulysses Marshall. Now, I'm going to share a little bit about Ulysses before I actually ask him to join our conversation, because this is someone whose work speaks volumes. I'm most connected with him through his visual art, but I also discovered his poetry. So I said, okay, well, we're going to have some fun on Sojourn with Words, introducing you to our viewing family. And I hope each of you enjoys getting to know this artist just as much as I have. Let me share a little bit about Ulysses Marshall. He was born in Vienna, Georgia, and is the recipient of a Purple Heart from a tour in Vietnam. He describes his artwork as a gift to him from his grandmama. Through her stories, as she worked on her patchwork quilts, she instilled in him as goals as an artist to use stories, those tales, to share the plight, pride, dignity, and courage of a people whose lives have been bent but not broken. Now, he was educated in Albany State University, Albany, Georgia, in sociology. Marshall received his Bachelor of Arts degree from the Maryland State Institute College of Art, MICA, in Baltimore, Maryland, and then received the Philip Morris Fellowship and Master of Fine Arts degree under the instruction of Grace Hartigan Hofberger School of Painting at MICA. He is the recipient of the distinguished Whitney Independent Study Fellowship in New York, as well as several Maryland State Arts Council Individual Artist Awards. His works are included in both public and private collection. Now, Marshall also lectures at colleges and universities and conducts workshops for children. He's the author of a book of poems titled Mr. President, I Don't Want to Live Here Anymore. Welcome, welcome, my good friend, Ulysses Marshall. Welcome to Sojourn with Words.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Now, when I talk about excellence in the arts, I certainly have you in mind. And I guess I'd like to start at the very beginning. What is it that brought you first to poetry?
First of all, my reading of some of Langston Hughes' writings, and I think my first integration with the visual, as well as I'm going to say spoken words, was Langston Hughes' Just to Be Simple.
Yes.
When he said, you know, Black folks don't tell white folks what cranks. That was my first piece of artwork that I decided to use the words of Just to Be Simple to incorporate into the work of art. So I would credit Langston Hughes with the beginning and the interest to move forward, to read more about him and to at least explore poetry as it would be combined with some works of art.
Right, right. Now, certainly the world knows you by far more as a visual artist than a poet, but how does poetry influence your art form?
I think, first of all, with my poetry or the written words, when I am about to produce a work of art, I usually jot down poetry, or I jot down a statement. It is basically a storyline. And I follow that storyline through the series of works. Once the works have been completed, then I might write a poem about that particular work, which opens up communication between the visual and the spoken or the written words. It also enhances the viewer's interpretation, which means that the viewer then has like a view, a written word, and his or her own interpretation of the work. I think it far more exceeds just exhibiting without poetry. The Paper Doll series that you were referring to earlier was the first time poetry and my art was exhibited at the same institution. And I thought that was very well received. And I was totally surprised by the works that the poets created to go with the works that I created. I was really amazed at that. And I think that should happen more often.
Oh, I love collaborating between the art forms. Absolutely, I agree. It was my honor to have been commissioned to do one of those poems for that exhibit at the Prince George's African American Museum and Cultural Center. The exhibit, Paper Dolls, was extraordinary. And I do have my copy of the publication. Yes, this little publication was just absolutely, it is a treasure. And to have my poem in it, I hope to one day my grandchildren will read it and appreciate the beauty of your art and my interpretation through the poem that I wrote titled Washwoman.
Oh, thank you. Well, Washwoman was born through my mother. My mother grew up in Georgia as I, and washing clothing outside with the large wash pot, and big wash pot with the fire burning underneath, clotheslines. And I remember that. I think all my work is a reflection, and the poems that I write are reflections and reminders of my childhood. There are memories of people that I have known, experiences that I have gone through with people, and also the struggle and the surviving of the raging storm that our culture has had to endure for such a long period is it's the bread
Right.
of which I eat and produce. I try to honor our culture.
Yes, it nourishes us. This art does nourish us. It nourishes our soul. I remember when I first saw that particular, and I know we're going to move on from that particular piece of art, but clearly I was drawn to it because when I first looked at the entire selection of your work that was presented to those of us who were a part of that exhibit, I was drawn to that because it took me back to my early childhood years when I was being raised on a farm. And I remember the clotheslines with the sheets hanging and billowing in the breeze. And I remember the scrub boards. Although I was a child and wasn't using them, I saw them in use by, elders. And it was something that I had not thought of those years, and that memory had not come to me until I saw your art. And then it was like a flash, and it took me right back to the farm where sheets billowing on the clothesline. So art does that. And I think that's a wonderful experience. Now, I wanted to ask you, do you typically create art in series? Is it like if you do a piece of art, is it always a part of a series, or is it individual pieces that come to you?
It's both.
Okay.
Normally, the process that I use is if I'm having an exhibition, I will normally ask, am I titling it or the institution is titling?
I see.
If I am titling the exhibition, prior to begin the painting, I have what I call a storyline. I create a story, or I might write a poem, or I might write a sentence that focus and guide me through the process. And it's like a referral. If I'm off target, I can always refer back that story and move forward. I think what really happens here is that I grew up with my grandmother. I was detailed to live with my grandmother from my parents because her husband passed prior to my birth, and I was the only son. So my grandmother was a patchwork quilt maker. And as she worked on her quilts, she would tell stories to me as a form of entertaining. There were no other boys or in the environment which my grandmother lived. So paper dolls was my form of recreation. So the paper dolls series came from my youth playing paper dolls and watching my grandmother make her patchwork quilts. And as years passed, I was in Buffalo, New York one summer working and happened to see the Cooney's Woman 1. And as I stared at that picture or the painting of Woman 1, it was like my grandmama kind of slapped me upside the head and said, "Boy, it's my quilt. It's just in paint." And I was like, wow. So I went back to Albany State and I stayed in the art department so much that the chairman of the sociology department called me in and said, "Why don't you just go to the art department? Why don't you just change your major?" And so to my senior year, I changed my major from sociology to fine arts.
Seems like art found you. Okay, you talked about having, once you were, say, commissioned to do an exhibit, you craft a anchor piece, a line that you use to steady you, to bring you back to true north, as it were. How does the poetry influence the art? I know how the art influences the poetry, but how does the poetry influences the art?
I think with poetry, once the book, Mr. President, I Don't Want to Live Here Anymore, is kind of a reference, I can go and read some of the poems that I have written. And from that poem, there comes inspiration.
Okay.
With that inspiration, then I can visually imagine what the work should look like, what I am trying to communicate to the viewer. And then I would take that poem and create a body of works from that poem, going back, referencing, reading it again, and making sure that the statements that the artwork would make is a marriage of that particular poem that I have read and is referring to.
If you were to say that there is a message of your poetry, does it intersect with your art, or are they do they tend to be separate?
They both intersect, and sometimes they're separate.
I recall that you do work with young children sometimes, workshops. If you were to be speaking to a young audience today, presenting to them your approach to visual art and your approach to poetry, what advice would you offer?
Well, in speaking to young students, I first say to them is that you must have strength, you must have discipline, you must have courage, and you must have the ability to communicate your feelings and accept criticisms. Basically, I want them to be in a position that they are accountable and appreciative of what they do, knowing that at some point that what they do might receive negative criticisms. But if you're prepared to go forward, if you're prepared to take ownership for what you do and be accountable for that, then you can always move forward, whether you are writing poetry, whether you are doing artwork, or whatever your employment is, that once you develop that, a sense of self-esteem, self-worth is most important. I always tell kids, before you put the brush to the canvas or before you put the pen to the paper, look at yourself, make sure that your self-esteem and your self-worth is intact. That is what people look at. That is what people kind of judge you on.
And it does come through the art. Absolutely. You're totally on point with that. I know, having worked with youth as well, and I know we're not just working with youth these days as artists, but the young people are so very important, especially for the future. But they too have voices that need to be heard. And so many times the notion of art as something of substance is missed by the youth until they reach later points in life. I think if we can say to our young people that poetry is more than simply words that rhyme, and visual art is more than simply sliding a brush on canvas. There are just so many lessons that can be taught. Truly, the lessons of life that your grandmother gave you have stayed with you and have enabled the world to understand many cultural realities of years gone by, but also of optimism and hope for the future. So thank you for all that you have continued to do. I was very pleasantly surprised when I ran into you at my granddaughter's school, and you were you were one of the instructors in the art department there. And I said, well, I knew you from another arena, but that just validated for me just the significance of who you are as an artist.
That was one of the most important journeys in my life, working, and I enjoy working with children. The Glen Arden Woods Elementary School at the time, I was a substitute teacher, and I did a arts club for maybe 2 years there. And what happened is that with the children that was in the club, one of the first things we learned to do was to be able to accept criticism and to be able to share your creativity with the person next to you. So I would pair up 2 to 3 kids in a group, and they would work on one piece. And in working on that one piece, they had to communicate, they had to divide where with their space, how to interface with another person, how to ask permission, how to then create a voice. But I thought create a voice with a voiceless. Your voices are most important. So how you fuse yourselves together and communicate and produce a work of art, it's not just yours, it becomes theirs. And when you put it on the wall in the school, it becomes an environmental piece that you should be very proud of. And they were very proud of what they produced.
Yes, yes. Well, listen, we have to get back to hearing some poetry by Ulysses Marshall. I've been talking about you as a visual artist and weaving it together with your approach to poetry. But how about we let our viewers now experience the poetry of Ulysses Marshall? Perhaps you can read from your book that you referenced earlier, Mr. President, I Don't Want to Live Here Anymore. Or perhaps there are other poems, but what would you share by way of inviting our viewers of Sojourn with Words to the poetry of Ulysses Marshall?
The first, they came in wooden ships, forward, backwards, rocking from side to side. It entered calm at first, yet the course was difficult. Deeper it penetrated into the darkness. Its horizon seemed lost forever. Days unto nights, months unto years, rocking from side to side, tearing a base from the body, forcing life into a new world. Dreams, sounds, screams, realizing with all its strength, hope, gone in a strange new world, men, women lose themselves, lose their lives, lose their thoughts, lose their past. In a strange world, men, women lose their lives.
Okay. Yes. Okay, transatlantic. Okay. Was there a few more? Yeah, let's go.
And this is to my mother. Woman of burden, proud you stand now, strapped across your back, a cotton sack with screaming noise from children at your side. Heat streaming from pots and pans, from the kitchen of masters, your head tied with rags, so tight that headaches were impossible. Gone but not forgotten are those times. Woman of burden, sun up to sundown, jobs that paid only pennies for washing, for ironing, for scrubbing floors. Woman of burden, giving birth to strong, beautiful children, unfinished.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Please continue to share poetry, please.
Okay, unfortunate. Displaced people sing freedom songs in the fields, roaming from plantation to plantation. Identities lost, separated from children, families, carrying death within. Owners live in the big houses. Displaced people live by the railroad tracks, living by the sides of the roads, where trailway and greyhounds send sightseers. Displaced people without, living for reasons of intellectual conversation. And God said, go down, Moses, in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. And then send ships to Africa to capture slaves. My spirit never left. It is always with me. And Moses placed his rod over the sea, and it parted. They set sail to a new world. My spirit never left. It is always with me, even in this country where Moses was killed and Pharaoh lives.
Fabulous.
This is dark hands of life. Contained, sharp they were, extending, showing themselves, their bodies, their pride. Helpless they stood, enslaved, bound, chained. Many different tribes together they stood. People in prison, not knowing each other's language, song, rhythm. Contained, standing for servants, for fear hand, shocked they were, not standing for a human being. It is better to die alone. Softly rotating in and out of the warmth, cold as it appears to surface again, against its sides, pushing, pulling, between birth, it is withdrawn. Its strength, faith, escaping after each penetration, exploding, body growing numb, sounds of relief, moan, satisfaction, with thrust, withdrawn to die. Minutes for the seconds, it hands tied behind, feet bound to a rope, body being dipped in and out of the sea. It is better to die alone than be a slave.
Wow. Such powerful imagery.
Well, these are the words that I sometimes create my artwork from.
Yes. Beautiful. Painfully beautiful.
It is kind of the experience of life that I've known and the experience of a culture that I am part of.
Absolutely. Can you provide your contact information for our viewers? Your website, can you actually read the letters off so that people can know how to contact you?
Okay, to contact me through the webpage, it is Ulysses, ULYSSES, Marshall, MARSHALL, junior.com. You can also Google me, Ulysses Marshall, and the imagery will come up. My email is the best way to get me. Email is marshall.artist, that is AT@work@gmail.com. If you wish to do a studio visit, you can email or phone 301-785-4511.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that. With regard to your appearance today here on Sojourn with Words, first and foremost, thank you. Thank you for sharing your poetry. I'm looking forward to staying in touch, and I hope our viewers will reach out to you, as some of them sometimes do. We never know, but it will be a while. But I hope that you can continue with the excellence that you have for many, many years. I want to make sure that we do have poetry and visual art by Ulysses Marshall for the Sojourn with Words viewers to enjoy and to be edified and uplifted by, because your work speaks volumes. Thank you so much for being a guest right here on CTV's Sojourn with Words. I'm the host, Sistah Joy, and our guest today was Ulysses Marshall.
And thank you very much for the invite. I so enjoyed being with you today.
We enjoyed having you.